When it came to slaughterhouses, I had a real problem with that. I remember reading this thing. He was like a pasture-raised pig farmer. His name was Bob Comus. Walked away from his farm. He wrote like a blog post, and basically what he describes is, you know, when you treat animals really, really well, they grow to trust you. And so he would guide them onto these trucks that would go to slaughterhouses. It's like if you have a dog.
Like they wouldn't resist it.
No, because they expect that you're going to do what's right for them because you always have. He would walk them on, and then they would kind of turn around and look at him as they're being driven away.
Yeah.
Before we get started on today's episode, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the land of the Darug people. We would like to acknowledge and pay respects to our elders past and present and the next generation coming through. Now, onto today's episode. In this episode of the Level Asian podcast, we're joined by Amit Tewari, founder of Soul Burger, plant-based entrepreneur, and former medical doctor. Amit shares his challenges with parental expectations of becoming a doctor, how he managed to juggle medical school and running his own restaurant full-time, and we also hear about the journey of moving Soul Burger entirely into the plant-based space and the challenges along the way. Amit also shares his vision for the next 5+ years in business, along with how he's changing up the vegan food space. He also offers some advice for future business owners too. Enjoy the episode.
So, all right, the place I want to start actually, I want to take it back because, dude, I remember, and for context, we went to high school together.
Hell
and we
yeah.
were really close mates during
Hell
high school.
yeah,
And then
for
you
sure,
fucked
man.
off to another school.
I did. Yeah.
So you want to
true.
tell me a little bit about that? Because I feel like, okay, what happened was I was like, cool, 1 year, like you go on school holidays, you go for like, summer break.
Yeah.
And then you come back and I was like, where's Amit?
Yeah.
You guys gone. And then
Yeah.
you went to North Sydney Boys.
Went to North Sydney Boys.
And then how did
that's
that go?
right. It was good, man. It was a massive cultural change. Our school was very. There was not that many white people at our school.
Yeah.
I think there was like one or two in our grade. Like there wasn't that many, right? And when I went to North Sydney Boys, yeah, it was very different. And the other thing is in our school there wasn't that many brown people as well. And then when you went to North Sydney Boys, I saw like a lot of like Indian Australians, Sri Lankan Australians. That was weird for me. Like I never saw that growing up. And yeah, saw a lot of white Australians and different part of Sydney as well, North Sydney. Like it was, I mean, we went to Sefton, which is like, it's like southwestern Sydney. It's very different. So yeah, it was massively different, but it was good, man. I met a lot of different people. I've got some really close friends from North Sydney Boys. I think anytime you can meet, a different groups of people and connect with like that's a massive plus in my mind. You grow up and you're like, this is really important, so the more people you have exposure to, the more people you can hang out with and talk to and feel like they're your people, I think it's a good thing. So it was very cool, man.
No, man. And like the other thing that I remember very vividly growing up together in high school was you'd talk about your family a lot, particularly I think your dad. Like your dad was hilarious, I remember. Like you have like so many stories about your dad. But maybe for the viewers, because obviously I know
this has been a long. This is
a long time.
This is like almost 17 or 18 years.
Yeah.
Hey, so yeah, I'm learning too now. Like about what was I like back then? I don't even. We remember each other very different to how we are now.
Well, I would say you are pretty similar to how you were in high school.
Yeah,
that's not a good or a bad thing. It's just like an observation.
Yeah.
I think just as a general personality as well.
Yeah.
Very similar. Like I remember when we caught up very recently, I was like, this dude's exactly the same from high school. I was like, in a good way, right?
Yeah.
It's great. And I remember you saying like you'd have all these stories about your mum and dad, but I'm actually curious and if you can like tell viewers about sort of childhood for yourself. Like what was it like? Because you grew up obviously in like the South Granville, Auburn area,
West,
which is a rough area of Sydney in my opinion, or relatively rough.
Yeah.
Like how would you describe like childhood?
In many ways, it was amazing. I mean, look, I view it as like our childhood is like we're like part of stories. That's how I view it, right? And so if you think about, the story of myself growing up, like I'm a child of people that arrived from another country, right? And they're part of their story, and so it's kind of like growing up for me, like I think every immigrant child is like you're caught between different worlds, and especially where I grew up, there was like, there's not many people like me, like most people were Lebanese or Turkish when I was growing up. So in a lot of ways it was a lot of fun, but in other ways it was challenging.
And family life, like what was that like? Because my understanding was that it was family life was great. Like, I think you got older brother and sister as well.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about like family life?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, look, I think, we grew up in like a very like a loving household. We grew up in, it was like a big, like, a big family, but, three child family. Like, me and my brother went bike riding and like, hung out like in, local area or whatever. And, we did a lot of things as a family, obviously, like, little trips and stuff. I was very lucky, man. Like looking back, I think I grew up with like a lot of love and like I took a lot of the stories of my parents. I think in a lot of ways you're like, continuations of these values you see, and for me, I think like a lot of us, our parents, they left there where they came and they pursue opportunity, right? And so you grow up with those internalized value sets, like you see your parents, they're working hard, they're like educating themselves, like trying to get ahead, and they're instilling these values in you that, we came from here and, we didn't think you were going to get the opportunity that you're going to get if we go there. So we're going to go here. And so you carry that sort of legacy with you, And so, I mean, education was massive in our house, and that's like a religion to us, to Indian Australia. I mean, that's to Asian Australians, I think in general, like education is like, I think it's because it's like a route out of poverty as well. Like it's a probability thing, It's like, what are your chances to get out of poverty? It's like education, really. I mean, you could try sports or whatever, but it's very low percentage. So, and then, so, I mean, that was like massive for me as well, like constant, like, doing times tables with my mom, like reading out loud, like, just, I have all those memories, So then when I went to school, like I was always ahead, in like year 1, year 2, like I knew like the next thing already.
Did your parents have any expectations about you doing medicine? Because that was obviously the career pathway that you initially took. Or was that just something you self-imposed? Like, how did that come about?
I feel like for Indian Australians, like that is, that like every kid's got that expectation. Or, I mean, I think like, I feel like for me, there were stories that I had heard from my family where like a lack of medical care had led to people passing away. And that always stuck out in my head. Even people in my family who did pass away, like I'm talking like, like a generation back, 2 generations back, like often they're not even sure how they passed away. You know what I mean? There's like,
really?
So yeah, it's like, the person got sick and they were in bed and then they were kind of vomiting and they died. But it's like, it could be lung cancer. You don't even know really what it is. Like, because, when my parents grew up, it was like, it's like a beautiful area. They were actually British hill stations. Like it's like Nainital and Almora, which is like in the States called Uttarakhand in India. And they were like British hill stations. So in the colonial sort of, I guess, era, that's where the British would go and like, like get away from the natives, really. That's what they did. They wanted to get away from disease and whatever, and like the heat. And so they go to these places and set up like home away from homes kind of thing. So that's where they grew up. But then, when I guess in the post-colonial era, these places, while beautiful, still just didn't have much economic opportunity. So people ended up wanting to move. Yes, I think so where they grew up, like I think, hospitals were different. It'd be similar to like rural areas here, where, it's just, you don't have
access
big major. It's a very different reality. So that stuck out in my mind when I heard, like, when I was young and I heard, people passing away. And I think I always had that sense of like, I want to do something that's going to, I guess, help people in over there or something, or like bring care to places where they don't have it, and I think that was a big part of it. Otherwise, I can't say I was like particularly fascinated with like the human body or biology or so. I got more into like, science later, but when I was at school, it wasn't like that. But I think I just kind of got the marks and it was like, what do you do? Like with these marks, like you want to be a lawyer, you want to be a doctor, or you want to be whatever. And so I was just kind of like, I kind of fell into it, and then, it just happened that way.
You actually practiced as you said a junior doctor, I think at the time for a little while, or what was the sort of professional experience?
Yeah. So, I mean, I went to medical school till 3rd year. I went until 3rd year and I took a year off, and then I started a restaurant, as you do. And then I went back into med school and I finished it, went to 5th year. And in my 5th year, I took another year off, went back, graduated, went to internship, and then I did the first term of residency. And then when I got to residency, I kind of had to make a decision because I was doing a lot, you know, like I was, I think sometimes when you do a lot, you're not doing anything well, you know, you're just kind of all over the place. And so I had to make a decision, and I decided that I was going to pursue, you know, I guess restaurants and entrepreneurship and stuff. And I moved away from medicine. Yeah.
So was it the pull of, because I'm thinking I'm in your position, I'm going flipping burgers, proverbially, or saving lives. Like maybe that's not the right way that you were thinking about it. But what was it? Was it the pulling of running your own business that attracted you more, or was the push away from the medical career that you were like, look, this is not for me, I'm not into it? Because I remember we used to have conversations and be like, well, why'd you do it? And then I remember you'd sort of say like, you know, this is something you're really passionate about, which is the business. But then at the same time, I think you just didn't find that medicine was for you as well. So maybe touching on medicine itself, like, did you have any sort of thoughts about that? Was it, you know, could you have kept doing it if you wanted to? Or is it just something that you didn't enjoy, or you lost the passion for it?
I wouldn't say I lost the passion for it. I think, you know, we all have intuitive natures, and I think I've always been like a trader, you know, as a kid. I was always a trader. I don't know if you remember, but like, I remember like, I used to sell like caramel koala. Like I used to buy, like this is when I was really young, I used to buy like packets of caramel koalas and then start taking them out individually and selling them for like 30 cents each thing. And then I saw the not for individual sale sign later on. You know, I used to sell earrings a lot. So I used to like, you know, buy earrings from eBay and start selling those when they were a thing for guys and girls. I used to sell jewelry every once in a while. Like I used to do it at school as well a little bit when it was like Valentine's Day or whatever. I'd be like, I was always that kind of person, you know, I was always selling and trading. And so I think like you've got your intuitive nature that way. And I feel like that was the kind of person I always was. And so I think maybe an office setting and like sitting, like it just wasn't for me. I feel like entrepreneurship or that idea of like wanting to create something or like wanting to build something, it can be quite innate, you know, like, and you can kind of fight it, or, you know, you can ignore it and stuff, but then you'll do a side hustle and then the side hustle will be the main hustle or something like that. So I don't think I was a great medical student, but I think it's also because of my mentality about school. You know, like I was the kind of guy, like I was not great at school until year 10. Like I was okay. I remember like sometimes I was terrible. Like I think I came like second last in like chemistry and or science or something in the whole grade at one point. Like, and I love science now, you know, but the thing is I was the way I learnt was wrong, you know, like I never looked at it as like education. I looked at it like, I got to do this test and just like finish this test.
Like a chore,
yeah. So that's how I looked at school always. And then I ended up like, even when I got into North Sydney Boys, like I studied really hard and then it was done and I was like, I'm done. And then in North Sydney Boys, like for the first year, I don't think I was that good. I was okay. Like I worked really, I was so behind. I think I came in, I was like, what? Like these guys know so much more than me. And I was like, and I had a bit of a complex about it because I was like, man, like,
you're compensating.
Well, I mean, I got asked, like I remember I did chemistry in year 11 and I got asked to like leave the class because I was going to like drag the scaling down of the class.
Really?
Yeah. Like I was so behind, you know, like in maths, I remember being recommended like year 10 maths, you know, when I was in year 11, you know, and so I was like, wow, like I'm really behind, you know what I mean? So
you still did all right if you got into
I studied really hard and I also, I ended up veering towards subjects that I didn't need a background knowledge in. So I did like legal studies, like modern history, and I was always reading as a kid. So that I was always like, I could take to that really quickly and I could like, and you know, there were like essays and forming arguments and I felt like I was always good at that, you know? So long story short, I think I was probably just more geared to entrepreneurship or something like that. I think it was an innate thing.
I was just going to ask, was there a moment that made you realize, or were you at the end of your degree where you graduated and you were like, shit, I have to do something now? Or was it just an event that happened in your life that made you realize that you had to change?
No, I think I never walked away from anything, you know, like I didn't walk away from medicine and I never walked away from the restaurants. I just kind of juggled them so much that I wasn't doing either well. And I had to make a decision about like where my life was going to go, you know, and I chose the restaurants that way. Because you can't be half-assed, you know, like especially in medical school, like when I was a resident, like you just, you know, it's so competitive, man. Like people are really smart, like, you know, and people expect you to know, like, you know, you don't just rock up to hospital. Like, you know, if you're doing a rotation, you have to like learn about the rotation. And if you're assisting in a surgery, there's going to be surgeons that grill you, you know, and say, you know, okay, so hey, and they don't stop with a question, you know, it's not like,
it's brutal.
What's this? And then I don't know. Okay, no. It's like, so what's this? I don't know. Okay, well, what are the nerves that innovate that?
They'll
I don't
keep
know.
going.
Okay, well, what are the blood vessels in this? Yeah, it's like it'll just keep going, and if you don't know what if you don't know, it's like embarrassing as well, because like
Yeah. You
have to live and
there's a whole
breathe it.
team there, and
They're
so it's
watching
like
you.
yeah, and I empathize a little bit with I had some like kind of I guess people in like surgeons and stuff who asked me the question. I'm like, do you want to do this? Because you feel like your mind is elsewhere. So. I think
they've
they were
asked you
right.
that question before.
I had one of them ask me that. Yeah, one of them asked me that. It was just kind of like, because I was always talking, I got friendly with him, and I was always talking about what I was doing outside of medical school. And so he was just kind of like, yeah, because it's true, you're 18, you choose a career, like it's ridiculous, really. Like you're not going to, like you don't know anything at 18. So
To start a restaurant
yeah.
in third year, that was going to happen in third year.
Third
uni,
year,
dude.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
crazy, dude.
Yeah.
I don't know what I was doing in third year. I definitely wasn't starting a business.
Yeah,
I mean, I
yeah,
had
yeah.
ideas about wanting to start a business. And I think at that age, at least from my recollection, was always like, and Dave and I used to have conversations around, innovating the next product or e-commerce business. But you went and opened a restaurant,
Yeah.
which I think anyone who has half a brain about
Hospo.
restaurant hospo
Yeah.
it's not the best industry from
No.
a profit making exercise. It's
No,
like it's
no.
friggin' like the brutal. The unit economics don't make sense a lot of the time. So
Yeah.
But also the time that you're investing, plus doing medical practicing or school, that eats up so much.
Well, how
of
much?
your
Hang
time.
on, the money about it. It's like, dude, there's one thing to want to start a restaurant, another thing to start it, right?
Yeah.
Where'd you drum up the money for this to get it going?
So, I mean, the first restaurant, which was in 2012, when I took that year off med school, I worked as like an employment consultant, and I was also working in restaurants. So I saved a bunch of money, and then I borrowed off like friends and family, basically, and I came up with a really small amount of money. Like it was like I don't know if you remember the first restaurant, but it was like
Was this at Randwick?
yeah.
the
It was
spot,
like it was like a converted bakery, and it was like my dad helped me a lot to build it, and I did a lot of it myself as well. And like, it wouldn't like, yeah, if you go in today, like you'd be like, what? Like, how is this even trading? Like, is this like a warehouse, But yeah, so that was how I came up with the money. And in terms of the skills, like, I mean, look, in terms of the unit economics and what it was, like, there was no reason why I chose restaurants. Like, I think I've always had the tendency to like do first and think later, So I think I just went, I like burgers, and I like the idea of like opening a place where I can hang out and friends can hang out. And so that's why I did it. Like that's the level of thinking behind it. There was no thinking behind it.
Yeah.
I kind of stumbled into hospitality. Like I wasn't passionate about cooking. I had like, I was not at all in the space. Like it was just, I stumbled into it, started it. But I think I like people, like I like engaging with people. And from a personality perspective, I think that's what you're talking about when you say hasn't, because people say it to me a lot. They're like, when I see people and stuff, I'm just like, I'm always like chatting to them and I'm interested in what they're doing. And like, I like talking to people, So I think that drew me to hospo, was like the idea of being able to like, just, say, hey, how you doing? And
Bring people
I'm
together,
like,
yeah.
yeah, man. Like, yeah, exactly. Like people come together, they share a meal. It's like, it's special, So I don't know if I could be doing an e-commerce business or like a business behind the scenes. I feel like a brand type business is what I was kind of, I think, I don't know, man, you stumble into it, but maybe you're always going to do something like that as well.
Well,
Yeah.
Soul Burger is obviously a really strong brand now, but what was I'm curious to know what the first few years were like, because obviously you said you were sort of juggling, you were switching between that and, finishing off medical career and studies. Was it tough the first few years in business? Like, how was it? Like,
It was so tough, man. It was like sometimes I look back on it, I think I worked too hard. I really do. I feel like, but I don't know. Look,
are we
there's
talking
pros
about
and
here?
cons.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, if I'll give you a rundown of the day, right? So, I mean, in that time where I took off a year of med school and then went back to med school, and this is when I was doing my hospital rotation. I think I was at like Blacktown or Mount Druitt Hospital, one of the two. I used to get up. I used to go to the hospitals. Like I think I used to get in there at like 8 o'clock or 7:30 or something like that. So, wake up at like 6:30 or 6 o'clock or whatever and get ready. And then I would go from like 7 till 5. And then after that, I would drive to Randwick, which was like roughly an hour. I think it was like an hour and a half
Jesus,
at the time.
yeah.
It's like an hour and a half, get into Randwick, do the night shifts. I do like 6:30 to like 10, and then I would like study or do the
study
accounting. Well, I
afterwards?
have to, because like you have to know things, you know, because you have exams, right? You have like you have your, it's like they're proper exams, like they're very difficult, you know. So I would study, and I would also do the restaurant stuff. So I would do like, you know, I don't know, like, you know how many things there is in a business, you know, like the social
ordering,
media,
staffing.
the ordering, the accounting, like it was brutal. Like I would fall asleep in my car, you know, when I drove home, but like, I kind of like, I guess I made my bed, you know, like I made this decision. I signed this lease. Like I signed a lease for $500,000 when I was like, you know, 22 or something.
Jeez.
Like, I just went in, you know, and it was like sink or swim. And it was like, what are you going to do? You know? And like, it was really tough, man. Really tough, because if you haven't got a space, if you haven't built the ambience, if you haven't, you know, like who's going to walk into a converted warehouse? You know what I'm saying? Like you can feel like you feel it when a restaurant hasn't spent money in its operation. And so, you know, we weren't making any money. Like, you know, we had landlords serving us eviction notices. Like I was always behind, always broke, maxed out credit cards. Like, it was brutal. And then go and do meds, you know, go and do medical school, you know, like, it was really tough, man. That year and a half, that 2 years was like, it was like make or break, you know? And I think, but I feel like now that I've come out of that, like you feel like you've got this armor, you know, or something. Like I'm not very fazed by the challenges and stuff.
Yeah, you've
now.
already
Like,
been at the bottom, right?
yeah, I feel like, I just got perspective as well. Like, you know, at the end of the day, like what's the worst that can happen? You know, like you try your best and that's all you can do, you know? So, but yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel like I missed out on stuff as well. Like, I mean, you know, like my wife now, back then, she, you know, my partner, like when we were in med school, like, you know, she went traveling in South America and everything.
She's a
with her
doctor as well,
friends.
is she?
Yeah, she's a GP. And I feel like I could never do any of those experiences because I was always tied to the restaurant because I had no one, like really, you know, like I had staff and stuff, but it was like, it was all me, you know, like taking accountability for everything and stuff. So yeah, it was really hard as a short answer.
So what kept you going then? Because I would know a lot of people who would probably just tap out, you know, after say the first gig, but you said 2012. So we're talking literally like running on 11 years now since the very first one, right? 2023.
Yeah.
So
I'm a veteran, man.
Yeah, that's it. You know, a decade.
Sometimes I don't see it that way because I'm always used to being the youngest person in the room, like a lot of the time. But yeah, I mean, what kept me going? Like, I don't know. It's weird. I think there's a thing with entrepreneurship. It's like, you don't want to quit. And I definitely am the kind of person that I don't want to quit. Like I won't quit, you know, and especially if the business is tied to a broader vision of something I want to do, which is definitely now. But then you also have to weigh that up against the skills of knowing when to walk away.
Yeah,
you know?
sunk costs, right?
I don't think I know it. I don't think I know that skill. Like, you know, people, you know, there's like serial entrepreneurs, like people that start something like, nope, doesn't work. That's cool. Fold it. Start something else. Nope, doesn't work. Okay, sell it. Start something else. I'm not that. You know, I think I just go all in on something. I think I've just gone. You know, but then if you think about it, I have failed many times, you know, like the first restaurant, you know, it was called Panache, like that's closed, like technically I just changed the name. I just like changed the name, changed the board, painted it, done, new shop. Then we had Street Soul Burger Bar, same thing, right? Like operated it for a couple of years and then I realized everyone started calling us Soul Burger. It was Street Soul Burger Bar. Everyone's like Soul Burger. And I was like, it's a way better name, right? So I was like, okay, cool. Got the name. And then again, like repainted, like that's how I am, you know, like just keep iterating. Like, you know, so it is failing and restarting, but it's never, I've never walked away from it, you know? And then, got to Soul Burger and that actually did really well. But, you know, crisis of conscience, you know, it was like a moral thing for me where I had to walk away from that and then make it, you know, plant-based, which is what it is today, which in the beginning was a terrible business move, you know, when making it plant-based. Like it's funny because at that time, if you came into our restaurant back in 2015, like we were packed. Like we were the only, like I think we were Australia's first wholly plant-based burger joint. We were like the originators of totally plant-based. Like there was Lord of the Fries, which was, I think they were vegetarian. They were vegetarian at the time though. So we were like gourmet burgers, plant-based. It was like a wild thing for people back then, you know? And like we had people fly in from interstate, like, but we never made any money because there was no industry, you know? So there was no like, I used to like try and import proteins from the US and like get it through customs, like do just random things that a restaurant operator would never, ever do, you know? Like I used to pick up proteins, drive them around, like, get pallets worth of things and store them in shops, like, because there was no supply chain. There was no distributors that even took this on properly, so, and it was so expensive, at the time. And it was like, there's so many learnings in that journey of like, it's like I went to uni in a different way, that's how I view it. Like I went to uni in a different way. Like obviously I went through medical school, and then I went through like the university of like that entrepreneurship of like plant-based entrepreneurship.
Well, you said crisis of conscience. So like, what was it that caused you to move into the vegan or the plant-based space?
I can think of like quite a few early memories. Like I remember reading a poem in primary school called The Battery Hen, which is like this classic poem. It was written a long time ago, and it describes the life of a hen. And and it had a massive impact. And we read it, and it was like describing the experience of a hen. And it was I think I was like in year 3 or something, and it had a really massive impact on me. So I can remember that. And I remember saying, I think I used to say to my parents and stuff, I want to be vegetarian. But if you remember me in school, like I was like the furthest thing from that as well. Like I grew up on so much meat, I grew up in like Auburn, Granville, like, kebabs all the time. There was that. And then there was like, the Simpsons episode where Lisa becomes a vegetarian. Like there's all these little things that kind of kicked in for me. And then I think I got into like moral philosophy, I think a bit later as well, like maybe like 18 or something, where I started reading about, the different branches of like ethics and stuff. And I always thought to myself that we shouldn't do this, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'm not going to do it. It just means I think we shouldn't. It's a bit like, I don't know, it's a bit like smoking cigarettes or something, right? Like I would smoke a cigarette, but I wouldn't be a tobacconist. You know what I mean? Like, because I don't want to purvey this. I don't want to be. And I think, and so when I started the restaurant, especially when I was caught up in the business of doing it, like any business, you look at your inputs and stuff and your outputs, and you're like, well, why is this supplier charging me this and this supplier charging me that? And I realized I could get meat for way cheaper than I was getting it, and that took me down a rabbit hole of thinking about why it was cheaper and looking at, and then. Yeah, it came across like slaughterhouse footage and things like that. And
you wanted to understand the supply chain and how it all worked.
Yeah, well, I mean, because they're not like, I remember, I remember asking questions to like people that were our suppliers, and they would like let me know that, that this is what's happening, and I had a really big problem with that, like it was a very, it was like, I just felt like it wasn't right. And from a legacy perspective as well, like to me, like, part of doing entrepreneurship is you're trying to like create something for the world fundamentally, I think. Like when you get, it's not really about money. It's not, or it shouldn't be, I think. It should be about like, what are you doing? What are you building that's going to have an impact on the world? Like whatever it is, So I can imagine the people who do dating apps or whatever, like, they've probably got this idea or this vision to like connect people more efficiently or whatever it is, So for me, when you're involved in restaurants, you're like, what are you bringing to the world? And, I think when you look at that as an input, you're like, wow, like it's quite awful. Like, I don't know if I want to be a part of that story, And so I almost walked away from the entire restaurant business after that. I was like,
you're right.
Yeah, like I actually told the landlord, and that's crazy. I told the landlord that I got a crisis of conscience.
What did he say?
He didn't give a shit. It's like, what are you talking about? Like,
pay my rent.
Yeah, it's like, what are you talking about? Yeah, but then I decided to make it all plant-based, and I guess the rest is history.
Okay, so lots of questions.
Yeah.
Unit economics again.
Okay.
It's expensive, right? You said the restaurant wasn't making any money. Were you losing money? Were you sort of just breaking even?
No, losing money for sure.
You were losing money. Okay.
Lots of money. Yeah.
And so again, what kept you going? Because you're like, well, this doesn't make any sense. This is not going to last much longer. How'd you keep going?
I didn't pay myself for a long time. So I didn't pay. It's funny. People used to think I was like wealthy, like I was so broke, man. Like I didn't pay, like I didn't get a salary or super for like, I think I started getting in like 2019 or something.
Whoa.
Like I never paid myself properly. Yeah,
Oh my
never.
God.
Like, I mean, look, I'm not going to say I never, like, I think I, like, if you equated it to a salary, it'd be like probably less than, I don't know, like a quarter of minimum wage or something. Like it was really low, So I think that's partially how we kept going. Unit economics wise, look, restaurants, fundamentally are awful as a business. They really are. Like you really, like the effort and what you put into it, it's a really, really hard business to make work. But I think once you can figure out a model and once you can make it work, then it can be like pretty phenomenal because you can scale it and you can like, yeah, you can, if a model works in one place and you figure out all the kind of the parts of that model and build systems around it, you can open it up in different places. And that's why, like you look at like the most valuable businesses, financially in the world, like, McDonald's and whatever, like they're all like many of them are restaurants, because people need to eat, and they become really powerful brands. So yeah, it's just, I think getting from zero to one in restaurants is incredibly hard. And then if you do that with very little money, it's really, really, really hard. And then if you add the plant-based side to it, it's really, really, really hard. Yeah, it's a very, very difficult business. You wouldn't get into this. I don't think you'd get into like plant-based restaurants unless you cared about it a lot.
Yeah,
and I think the market's changing. Like a lot of the players that were there are going now, and like it's obvious they were there because there was a wave and they saw it as an opportunity. But then they're like, oh shit, like this is really hard, and they bailed. You know what I mean? So I mean, look, yeah, money is good, like, but we're not trying to like, we want to be economically valuable. But yeah, I mean, look, if we served meat, we would for sure have like 10 times the market size. You know what I mean? So, but I'm not trying to maximize our economic value like that way. You know what I'm saying? Like it's a part of what I do, but it's not the whole story. Like the what we're really trying to do is make a cultural change in how people eat. That's like the big thing in my head. Like that's what makes me happy and keeps me going. So when I feel a bit down or I feel like there's a lot, I go into restaurants and it makes me really happy to see people eat our food. Like especially if they're not the typical consumer. We get a lot of like construction workers and tradies from around the area. They just come in and you can feel like that this whole thing is like our exercise of what we've done from 2015 to now. There was no plant-based section in Coles. There was no plant-based section in Woolies, nothing like that. There was no alternative meats. Like it wasn't normal to go to a regular restaurant and get a vegan option. This is all new, So I know that the businesses that started have played a part in that, in making it mainstream. And it's just normal that, from a purely market share perspective, that those people are going to look at those brands and go, oh, this is pretty good. We're going to add a vegan option to ours. And that's the point of what we're doing though, because we want to popularize it. So it's a win for us because we grow the market is how I see it.
This episode is produced and brought to you by Social Wave. Social Wave is a strategic content marketing agency helping businesses grow revenue using video, podcasts, and SEO. Head on over to socialwave.com.au to find out more. Now back to the show.
Well, I want to ask because you said you brought in plant-based side in 2015. And I remember when the vegan community or vegan space was starting to grow. Like I went vegan when I was in 2014 actually. Yeah. And I remember that movement, the vegan movement started with Raw Till 4. So there was nothing that was vegan that was cooked, let alone a restaurant. So how did you go from meat, switch it over to plant-based or even innovate that menu to begin with? Because again, like you said, there were no resources or supply chain for that. And having to import stuff from the US was already difficult enough.
Yeah. I think, I mean, there was definitely like an alternative meat wave coming on. So it's not like we were there when that was not there. So it was more like when we did it, it was the startings of it. Like I had seen a few products and actually before we went plant-based, we were half vegetarian and half ethical meat. Is what we were doing. Okay. Yeah, it was like a real gradual, move into plant-based. Yeah, it wasn't like I was like woke up and went, I think I was kind of in the position of like, I'd read about this long enough where I was like, yep, this is really bad. I know this is really, like, you read enough, like, especially if you're talking like, I used to read like, I don't know, like Peter Singer and like, David Pearce and like different philosophers who wrote about this. And it was like, I really struggled to find arguments against it, but I really wanted to find arguments against it because I didn't like the idea that I was doing something or I was part of something that wasn't, I think morally the right thing. I was in this position where I was like, yes, I think this is something that, is not great for the world. And, I don't know if I want to be part of it, like from personal perspective. And so I ended up having half meat and half vegetarian menu because I was like, well, the thinking at the time was, well, if people come in and they are going to eat meat, we don't want to turn them away. So I would rather those people come in and have higher welfare meat. So that was kind of how we started. And then that half vegetarian menu, we started putting on alternative proteins in that menu. So that's how I started knowing about the industry.
Testing it out somewhat.
Yeah. So I was like, the vegetarian menu is amazing too. Because what I was really trying to do, I was trying to promote the vegetarian menu, and the meat menu was kind of like there in
Trojan
case you
horse.
walk away. A little bit. Yeah. But the other thing was, I thought it was okay if, like, in terms of having higher welfare meat, I was like, well, look, if we can raise animals well and treat them well, then that's okay. Like, that's how I thought about it at the time. But there was a few things that I really struggled with. The first thing was, I realized a lot of the free range certifications were total marketing gimmicks.
Yeah.
It's their design to make you feel more comfortable with what you're going to do. And I would grill farmers, not farmers, like, I shouldn't say farmers. I would grill like the company, like,
Suppliers,
comms or whatever, like this, and say, okay, what's like your stocking density? Like, what are your debeaking practices? Like, and they'll just be like, what are you talking? Like, this guy's clearly not a restaurant operator. And when I grilled them on that enough, like, I started realizing that this is like a game of words. This is like free range, naturally raised. Like, what is all this? Fundamentally, like, are they raised outside? Like, do they have access to natural environments or not? Like, that's what I wanted to know. And the majority of the answer was no. And so I ended up working with this group called, I think they were called the Humane Accredited Association, where they would actually get pasture raised animals. And so that's what I would go to. So so I was like comfortable with the way they were living, right? So I was like, okay. But when it came to, slaughterhouses, I had a real problem with that, because the idea of like treating someone really nicely and then one day turning around and like, killing them was like, it's horrible to me. Like, I remember reading this thing by this he was like a pasture raised pig farmer his name was Bob Comus, and he walked away from his farm, and he was like one of the the people that people looked at for pasture raised farming, right? And then I think he wrote like a blog post, and I can't remember the title of it, but it was something like haunted by like 2,000 souls or something like that. And basically what he describes is, when you treat animals really, really well, they grow to trust you. And I think he took the practice of never naming individual animals though, I think. So basically to avoid connection, right? But fundamentally, pigs are, analogous to dogs, right? Like, they're I think they're smarter than dogs. Like they're beautiful animals, and they were growing attached to him, And so he never, like, I think in a traditional intensive farm, animals are very, like, anyone who has pets or deals with it, like, knows that their intelligence, especially emotional intelligence, is very high. Like, they can immediately sense fear, or they can sense like whether they should be worried about you or they should trust you or whatever. And so I think in an intensive farm, like, there's a sense that the animals are not your comrades. You know what I mean? Like, you're not their friend. And I think they get that, and they, constantly living in fear and so on. But when you raise them really well, they do trust you. And so he would kind of guide them onto these like trucks that would go to slaughterhouses, and they would go, because it's like, if you have a dog,
like, they wouldn't resist
no,
it.
because they expect that you're going to do what's right for them, because you always have, like, and I think, and like I've had a dog, and like I've got 2 cats now, and like I had a dog, and like, I know that these animals trust you, and I get that. And so he was saying, like, he would walk them on, and then they would kind of turn around and look at him as they're being driven away.
Yeah.
And that's what he meant by like haunted by, I think, 1,000 souls or 2,000 souls, something like that. So it's like he gets haunted by that because, he knows what's going to happen to those animals, and he's walked them there and have trusted him the whole time, and that had a massive impact on me, because like, it's like, it's such a betrayal, it is a betrayal. It's a genuine betrayal. And it's different from treating someone like, you treat someone horribly, their whole life, and then you walk, that's different in another way. And then this is like also fundamentally terrible, and like,
well,
so
this
it's
almost
like,
fundamentally sounds worse, because it's like lulling them into a false sense of security. And then
I think it's worse for your guilt as an individual, but I think for the animals, it's still better. Like, I mean, you put yourself in a position of a pig, like an intensively farmed pig in Australia is treated awfully. Like, you know, they're in gestation crates, the female pigs, they can't turn around. They, you know, their babies are separated from them. You know, the standard if a baby is sick is to be able to basically kill them with like the blunt force trauma. Like
Really?
it's awful. Like the practices that we have for intensive, and 90% of, you know, bacon and pork products are intensively farmed.
Right.
Because fundamentally this is a thing of economics, right? It's like if people want to eat animals every day and they want, you know, bacon and egg sandwich sold like every day, then you just can't have these pasteurized environments. Like it just doesn't make sense. And if you want it for the price you want it, like, you know, it's just efficiency. It's just that they don't have any value, I guess. So that's why it's that way. So yeah, that had a big impact on me, reading that. And then I think the other thing that had a really like big impact on me was when I realized no one really was thinking about it when they were buying meat. Like it wasn't like people did not care that we were selling higher welfare meat. You know, it didn't matter to them. Like it's not like people were going like, oh yeah, like I'm going to go there because, you know, this is pasteurized. And yeah, it's like people will always complain about the price, and we'll never make any money anyway. You know, like I was getting bacon for $33.50 a kilo. You know, my competitors are getting like $6, you know, and I couldn't sell, you know, the economics just did not value treatment of animals in the equation. You know, it was like an externality that wasn't priced. So we were, I felt like just increasingly more uncomfortable with the whole equation. And so decided, you know, we're going to make it plant-based, and that's it. You know what I'm saying? Like that's going to be the story that, you know, we're going to be a part of. And yeah, I mean, now it's, you know, it's obviously going where it is.
So I've had Soul Burger a number of times, and particularly during, I think, more recently, you know, like I remember we visited and even, you know, with my wife and Iris and I, we used to, you know, go all the time. Well, we still go, but I think one of the things that stood out for me was literally like the taste, because like you said, a lot of the motivation for people was just around, I think, taste. As we're like, would I eat this? You know, would I enjoy eating this? And I caught myself eating it and going, holy shit, this tastes literally like meat. Like I was like, I can't tell the difference. But if anything, I would argue even sometimes it tastes better than meat. And this is as someone who's a meat eater. I found that pretty phenomenal. So at what stage, like you made the decision to go completely plant-based, and then of course you still had these sort of supply chain issues or just availability of stock, the unit economics were quite messed up. When did you start to see like a bit of a turning point? Because obviously the business is doing, you know, fairly well now. Yeah, can you sort of describe that timeline? I
mean, look, I think me fundamentally as an entrepreneur, I changed a lot. So like I became much more financially literate, you know? So now I'm very militant about like our profit and loss statements, our cash flow statements. Like, so I, you know, I leverage our position as, I guess, one of the larger groups, and we've got like four, we're not large, but in this space, we're pretty large. Like, so I leverage that to get favorable terms. I kind of like, it's a process is the long story short. Like, you know, it's not any one thing. Like we built our kitchens to be super efficient around like how crew work and stuff. That's why we've put on, you know, multiple brands. Like it's all part of a story in around, you know, driving that restaurant to profitability. And that's what we're able to do. So it was like, and you know, the industry changed, like prices came down a little bit, like, you know, we're able to get more, there's more competition in the marketplace. So it's like you can, so it's taken a while for it to happen. But I think we're able to set up foundations for it. But yeah, man, I mean, I think it's not, I don't think it's any one thing I could say as to what brought us to profitability. I think it's like, it's just like me growing, I think, as a founder. And I think even like my mentality now as a founder is different. You know, like I take extreme ownership of outcomes now. Like, you know, I really take that sense of like, if it's not performing, it's my fault, you know, and like I need to do something. I have to change something. I have to like, you know, and we really try and hone in on customer experience. Like, you know, you talk to me and I'm very like philosophical, you know what I mean? Like I think people get sometimes this like, oh wow, this guy's really thinking about, you know, like, but when you go into our restaurants, you don't feel that at all because you're not meant to, you know, like when you go to eat, you're not going to like, you know, consider the world's problems, right? Like you're going to fundamentally like satisfy your preferences. And so that's what I think about. So I'm thinking like, what can customers touch, taste, feel, hear, see? Like, what is it like, you know, and that's what I'm trying to like, you know, even now, like, especially now actually when we hire and when we try and create our like head office and stuff, like I try and give the hardest problems and like the problems that really matter around growing our revenue and stuff, that's what I'm kind of trying to do now. Like that's where I'm focusing on. And I'm like, you know, taste wise, you know, have we nailed it? Consistency, have we nailed it? Like customer service, like, you know, I try and go through the different parameters and, you know, make sure we you know, kind of nail it. Yeah.
And are we going to say something?
No, I was going to ask another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
But it's going to go on a different note, so I don't know if you want to ask
Well,
yours
the
first.
only thing was for me is like multi-location, right?
Yeah.
You know, you had Randwick initially. What was the next one? Was it Newtown?
Glebe.
Glebe was the next one.
Yeah, Glebe.
Right.
And then I think our first Para store and then Newtown, and then we have Para back now, so we had to close it because the tram lines that were coming in.
Yeah, because you were in a
on-
different location previously.
Yeah, the tram lines came in on Church Street. Yeah, so we had to close it, and then we moved it, and Newtown. Yeah, so we got 4.
So from a scaling perspective, obviously, because obviously multi-location is a whole different challenge. Can you sort of describe what that was like, you know, and how did you make that decision? Because there's one thing to most people sort of fixate on just the one location, get that right.
Yeah,
then
yeah.
you went on to do, you know, another 3 locations, obviously one that had to move. How was the experience there?
The challenges are immense. You know, when you try and scale something, like, you know, if you stick to one restaurant, you could probably do it incredibly well. I think a lot of people fall into the trap of like they've got one thing and it's really good, and they're like, I want to multiply this. And so there's like a fable in restaurants where you have like, you know, someone who has like one restaurant and then they have like 10 and they make less money than they had when they had one, and they have like 10 times the stress. So it's like, why'd you do it? You know what I mean? I think, look, I, you know, for me, fundamentally, entrepreneurship for me as a career pathway was about making an impact on this problem. That's how I viewed it, you know? So if you think about the problem, I view the problem as like kind of like animal rights or animal ethics as a concept. I want to do something that helps us move toward the direction of improving lives for other animals. And so I've chosen the avenue of working within the market. You know, like you could be a politician, you could be an activist, or you could work within the market. So we're really like a market-based activist group. That's what we are. Like we work within people's preferences to try and change cultural kind of norms around eating, because I think that's really important and very much not looked at by a lot of people, especially when you have problems like you said, if people aren't committed to actually doing the problem. So like in the case of what, you know, you just described like a very normal thing where you were like, you know, I had soul burger, it tastes amazing, and that's cool. And because like most people, you know, who consume, you know, meat, it's about the taste, like it's culture and it's taste. It's not, when you describe some of the practices behind the industry, like I've never met a person that was proud of that practice, you know, like everyone's like, oh really? Like, damn, like nobody wants it, you know, like, so it's one of those things that you can solve through like innovation and technology, because, you know, fundamentally, like if you can give people the experience without all the baggage of the bad stuff, then why wouldn't they choose it? You know what I mean? Like and we're getting there with plant-based proteins, and there's a whole industry coming up, like, you know, with whether it's precision fermentation or cultured meat or whatever, like it's all designed around similar kind of philosophy of, you know, we can basically guide people away from using intensive animal farming as their method of eating if we can just either replicate the taste or provide, and I'm not so much about replicating anymore, like I'm about providing our plant-based twist on it, you know, like our plant-based taste is just as amazing. So like, why not? A little bit about like, you know, when you go to a cafe and a lot of people get soy caps instead of dairy cappuccinos, it's not necessarily because they're trying to, you know, reduce dairy intake and da. It's just they like the taste of it. And so we're trying to do a similar thing.
Yeah, smart. You were going to ask something.
Yeah, I was going to take it on a different note where speaking of innovation and how there's all these different alternative meats in the industry coming up now, one thing that is quite hot topic right now is the lab grown meat. And that's, in a nutshell, it's like they take the cell of an animal, so like a chicken, and then they produce it and they grow pretty much chicken or that type of meat in a lab. And there's a lot of morals or moral dilemmas around the vegan space and whether or not it's still ethical because you're still consuming meat technically. Have you explored that space or something similar that you're bringing into Soul Burger?
So I'll start with the actual tech, right? So what it is basically growing cells outside the animal's body, right? So it's like, for example, taking chicken cells, taking it from a chicken and then what do cells need to proliferate? They need like a certain nutrient soup to grow. And so it's like you can grow tissue, because what is tissue? Tissue is like collections of cells, and so is muscles and et cetera. So you can grow different cuts of meat technically outside the animal's body. That's what the basic tech is, right? And it's been around, like, I think, Winston Churchill talked about it like in 1930s
Really?
or something.
Wow.
Yeah, I think he's like a famous quote attributed to him where he's like, people will realize the absurdity of eating a chicken breast or something if you can grow the breast outside the chicken or something like that. I can't remember exactly what he said, but philosophically, it's always been there. It's like, what, if you can get the outcome without the whole process, like, why not? So that's the philosophy behind cell cultured meat. It's got a bunch of technological challenges. Like, in terms of exploring it, look, not really. I mean, I did actually. I at one point I was like kind of involved in I wouldn't call it even a startup, like just an idea around like cultivate, like basically working on the serum. Like currently it's fetal bovine serum is the serum that's used to grow cells, and that's got a bunch of ethical dilemmas because it comes from fetuses of cows. And it's also really inefficient, like as an actual serum to grow. So, but now that the technologies, this is so long ago. Like, now most cultivated meat companies are developing their own serums that are like plant-based or like that don't involve that kind of, one, expensive, and two, cruel process. So, in terms of the ethics of it, like, I can't imagine, like, I think, this is why it's really important to consider your values clearly, right? Like, what is your, like, if someone is like, okay, I want to reduce harm to animals, right? If that's your thinking behind it, this is a technology that could potentially make the entire animal industry redundant. The idea that you would be against that is just so ridiculous to me. Like, I could understand, people might say, well, it's technically meat. Well, technically, who cares? Like, what do you care about here? Like, you care about suffering to the animals, right? Like, that's the issue. So who cares if people can eat meat as long as there's no one that's suffering behind it. Like, and that's why I'm saying, like, thinking about why things matter and where your values come from is so important. But I get there are some concerns. Like, I get people who are saying, look, okay, fetal bovine serum, like, is that okay? Like, okay, I think everyone would say it's not okay. Like, it's not something we want to make into an industry, but at the moment it's the only thing they can use to help develop the industry, and then they'll move away from it. So that's kind of checked off. And then someone else might say, well, you're not challenging the cultural implications of it. It's a bit like, the idea of eating another animal is fundamentally disgusting. Like, we shouldn't be doing it. It's a bit like eating, like, you wouldn't say, what if you cultured humans and ate them? Like, is that okay? Like, that's disgusting. And, and it's like, I'm like, okay, yeah, culturally things change. Like, it's disgusting to us to eat other humans because we don't do it, But if you think about if something's right or wrong, disgust is not a good metric. So if you're grossed out by it, just don't eat it. Like, but other people eat it, and that's fine. You know what I mean? Like, people eat all sorts of different cuisines in different worlds.
It's a deep rabbit hole, eh?
Yeah. So, to me, these technologies, like cultured meat is one, which is, growing meat, I wouldn't say even a lab is a good description. I'd say like a brewery is better. Like, you're cultivating it in a massive, like, brewery, and it's a controlled setting. It's like so much cleaner, and it's like, if you think about all the pandemics and everything, it's constantly linked to intensive animal farming. Like, you go to a farm, you go to an industrial setting where they're growing animals, you would be shocked at the conditions. Like, there's feces everywhere. It's like, these are really dirty places, that's why they're behind walls, because no one wants to see them. Like, so this is just fundamentally a better tech. I think it's just, it's a cultural change that people are going to make. But I think, branding is really important. That's why I don't like saying like lab grown, because it makes people think Frankenstein. Like, that's not what it is. It's like, I think the word they're using now is like cultivated or something. It's like, it's meat that's, cultivated is a good word because you're growing it. But I think, branding it differently so it's not futuristic and stuff, but it's just a different way of eating. And I think it will become, like in Singapore, they're selling it now. So it's like they've got hybrid products with cultured meat. And I think the hardest problem in that technology is scaling it. How do you make it price competitive? How do you take it out of small settings into like huge facilities that can feed massive amounts of people? That's the hard part. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the industry. I really want it to do well. And no one's involved with it from a consumer, like, you said it's Soulburger, like no one's involved in it from a business perspective, because it's not for sale, like in any real sense at the moment. But look, the day comes down and is something we can sell, like for sure, because I'm committed to the project of wanting to reduce harm to animals. That's I'm not worried too much about definitions of words. Like,
yeah, because I mean, that's in a lot of ways, like you said, the marketing side is also a game of words as well. Another word or another term is like ghost kitchens. Because when you told me initially, and this was like, I think last year, about the sort of idea and the concept, I loved it. I think the way I described it was like almost in a way sort of very similar to the sharing economy. It's like underutilized assets, in this case kitchens, where you're trading and operating at a certain hours of the day, and other times it's just sitting there dormant and not doing anything. So can you sort of describe what you're doing with ghost kitchens, and then obviously that relates to Vegan Food Hub as well?
Ghost kitchens, there's different terms in the industry. So ghost kitchens normally refers to what most people think about it is, in America, what they've done is they've basically they've got pods in like parking lots, and you've got a group that builds these pods. That's one business, building the pods, and then other groups that rent the pods. And so I guess from a brand's point of view, you could be like, oh, I can open up Soulburger in like many different places now, because I don't need to spend the capital on a restaurant, because I can just rent a pod.
Right.
So I could, if someone's got a pod in like a kitchen pod in Cabramatta or something, I could be like, yep, we'll rent it, hire a crew in there, like one person or two people just watching Uber Eats deliveries come through, and they make it, and now you've got Soulburger and Cabramatta. Like that's the idea behind it. That's ghost kitchens. So that's not what we're doing. I think there's a bunch of problems with that idea, especially in Australia. It hasn't worked very well. There's more than a couple of reasons, but one of them is population density. We just don't have that many people. So we're not. The iPads aren't like in the US. It'd be like bing, bing, bing. There's just so many people ordering, whereas it's not like that here. Secondly, our like labor costs are just different to the US. Like, they've got like shocking minimum wages and stuff over there. It just doesn't translate. And the third thing is around like, our whole economics is just different here, from rent to cost of goods and everything else. It hasn't translated to a profitable business model in Australia yet. So that's ghost kitchens. That's not really what we're doing. But what we're doing, I think the better word is host kitchens, where what you're doing is you're using your existing kitchen in your restaurant. So like you said, a kitchen is fundamentally like a production facility, right? It's an asset in your business. And it's funny because when 10 years ago, a kitchen was seen as a bad thing. It was seen as like this waste of money. It requires all this maintenance, all these regulations. It's like you had Subway and like other brands, like no kitchen, like it's cheaper. It's like you don't even need a kitchen. Like, it's that. Whereas today, now because of the digital kind of nature of ordering, people are like ordering on their phone and they're ordering delivery. Now because it's so normal, kitchens have become like little production centers, So it's like if you've got a kitchen, you're only limited to by what you can cook. You're not limited to, and by how much you can cook. You're not limited to like the brand itself anymore. So there was a time where, I guess, there was a time like 4 years ago, where if you had a restaurant, your kitchen served your restaurant and that's it. And that's how it is for, 99% of restaurants, right? But there are players coming up, and I guess we're one of them, where we're saying our kitchen, yes, of course it'll serve our restaurant, but, because of the advent of digital ordering, so because of the idea that people can order on their phones and they're not necessarily going up to counters, and because of the nature of delivery, it means that, well, what is a brand? Why like if we can have a brand online and the kitchen is producing its food and people can order it, then that's a brand. And so, for us, it was kind of like, well, if we've got Soulburger now, and why can't we have an additional brand in our kitchen as long as we train our crew and we make sure that we can quality assure it? Why can't we get that food coming out of our kitchen? There's a whole infrastructure around ordering it and everything else, but if we can put that all together, then our kitchen is not just limited to Soulburger. It's limited to whatever we want it to be. So that was like the big kind of philosophical kind of thing that, kind of came into me. I was just like, yeah, wow, this is crazy. Like you've got ghost kitchens, you've got like digital ordering, you've got delivery. Like this is like a trifecta of things that have come up to say, this is the new industry that can kind of pop off. And then the second thing I think for us was like, we were not a burger shop. Like we were not a burger brand. You know, that's what I realized later on. So when I started, we were like a burger brand that happened to do vegan burgers. That was our thing. So we were all about, I wouldn't say stealth, but we were like not talking about the fact that we were plant-based, you know? So you come in, you eat it. I would say half our customers back in like 2016 or something did not know we were plant-based.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, they had no idea. Still, like we had people coming for a year and they didn't know, you know, like only when we blew up. Yeah, when we started getting more media, then people were like, I never knew this was vegan. Like what? So yes, I think that's, I always was like, we're a burger brand, happens to be vegan. Don't talk about the vegan thing because it's going to turn people off. The word's divisive and so on. That's how I thought. But I started realizing, you know, our customers are plant-based enthusiasts. They're not vegans, not vegetarians, but they're people who are fundamentally interested in plant-based food. And so we really are a plant-based restaurant that happens to do burgers. And when I made that connection, I was like, well, what the underlying theme for our brand is being plant-based. And so we can really reach out to like many other cuisines as long as it's all plant-based. And then it's a unifying theme because then it's like a clear mission. It's like a clear brand positioning. We've got a North Star and we're also able to serve, I guess, a greater market. You know, we're able to like get people who are eating just burgers with us to eat more than just burgers with us. And we're able to serve, a bunch of other people who might be interested in Mexican food or Lebanese food or whatever.
And that's what Vegan Food Hub basically is, like the collective of different brands, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So at the moment, Soul Burger's got 4 physical restaurants and Plantas Taqueria and Zaina's Lebanese have, are basically like digital restaurants operating out of Soul Burger. But, we're about to do like a crowd equity raise and, you know, the vision for that raise is to grow Plantas Taqueria and Zaina's Lebanese restaurants as well. So it's not going to be Soul Burger as the physical restaurants only. There's going to be different physical, I guess, iterations of the brands. But then if we open a Plantas Taqueria, out of that Plantas Taqueria in the back, they'll also be doing Soul Burger out of the back. It's just that the menu might be a bit like an express type menu and Plantas, when we open up a taqueria for it, is going to have a more expansive menu as well. It's going to have like, you know, tacos and whatever.
So it's like a primary brand and then you've got obviously all the other brands.
Exactly. That's it. Yeah. So it's like a front of house brand and then you got back of house brands. Cool. That's how I'm thinking about it. And it's not that we're never going to serve you. Like if you come in to a Plantas and say, I want to eat Soul Burger, like we're not going to say no. But I can't imagine, like I think 90% of the sales are going to be Plantas Taqueria, you know, and it's going to, you know, the vision for that is like physical like representations really help the digital ordering ultimately as well. You know, like if you eat somewhere, you get a lot of goodwill because when you see it, you feel the brand and then you might get it on Uber Eats or whatever else. Yeah.
Wow.
And crowd equity, why would you do crowd equity versus like private equity or other sort of funding options?
So with restaurants, I think you can grow a few ways, right? Like one of the ways you can grow is via franchising. One of the other ways you can grow is via like VC funding, which is like, I guess, private kind of funding. The other way you can grow is via like high net worth individuals. And then the fourth way is through, well, there's probably more than 4 ways, but fourth way I'm describing is through crowd equity funding. So franchising, I think we've done a franchise restaurant. I think for our industry with our margins, I think it's not a great way to grow. I think if you're like a mass market brand, so if you're like McDonald's, if you're like GYG, then I think it's different because I think for them, they've got such a massive market that their revenues allow for, you know, someone else coming in and taking, you know, 8% or whatever, or 7% of that, and that still makes sense for them. So that's, I think for brands that are not mass market or not even just mass market, are not doing mass market revenue, I think those brands, and there are lots of brands today that would have been thriving 12 years ago with franchising that are now like bleeding because Uber Eats and stuff as delivery has come in as a model, and initially it was like incremental sales and it was like, oh, you know, why not? Who cares if you're giving 30% away because you wouldn't have got it otherwise. That's fine. But it's now fully cannibalized your sales. You know, it's not like you've got in-store and delivery customers. They're both the same. Like, and it's just deciding whether they come in more or they don't. And most people now are eating more and more at home. So franchising, you know, I don't think it's a good model because like when I say sustainable, I mean like long-term for the business. I think that it's something that, you know, is really, I mean, there's examples of franchises and, you know, even in the plant-based space that, have really struggled with franchising and had to close like a bunch of stores. And so I don't think that's the right way for us. VC funding potentially, but from my experience with VC, I haven't got that much experience, but it's super kind of fast turnaround on capital. And it's like, I don't know if it suits restaurants that well.
Yep.
Like, it's like grow, like
grow at all costs type thing.
Yeah. And then it's like, okay, what happens after you, 4 years, you went massive growth. Now what? Like, are you profitable? Are you closing restaurants now? Like, what are you doing? Like, what's the point of it? Because to a lot of firms, they're just happy to like grow and then
cash out.
Yeah. So, but for me, like, we want to build the VFH into like an institutional business. Like, we want it to be like listed on the ASX and like have a massive change. And
nice.
So crowd equity funding, I think, makes a lot of sense because we kind of take the community with us, and even from a business perspective, like, I like the idea of like community ownership. I like the idea of getting our employees owning pieces of it. Like, I like that idea, of having like a collective, and your customers are your investors, and like it feels way more synergistic. So, and then high net worths. I mean, look, we have hit up some. I mean, I can't say my network is all that massive, with the high networks. But I feel like crowd equity funding is the better way anyway.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
I was going to ask if people do, because it's happening right now, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think
it's going to happen. Well, from the time of this podcast, like 2 weeks.
Yeah. So we'll obviously want to fast track this because I think obviously if anyone who loves the direction or they want to get involved with, actually throwing some dollars into this, what's the best way to sort of get in touch to find out more about it?
So if you kind of look us up, I guess it'll be on our socials, it'll be on our websites. If you look up Vegan Food Hub or Soul Burger or Plantas, like, I'm sure it'll be on our websites. And then we'll also have like on Birchal, there'll be like a crowd equity funding page. But I think the best ways are socials. Like, if you follow us on socials, like Vegan Food Hub or Soul Burger or Plantas or Zana's, it'll be there.
Nice.
Yeah.
A couple more questions then, just to wrap up. So
Sure.
the first one is, you talked about North Star. You alluded to potentially publicly listed. Like, what's the ultimate goal? Like, let's just call it, 5-10 years down the track. What do you want this to look like?
So I always go back to that brand mission of like culturally changing how we eat. That's really important. So, I mean, at the moment we've got burgers, Mexican and Lebanese, like, as quick service concepts. There's like 15 other things we could hit up. So we want to create like a suite of like 10 to 12 brands. At the moment, we're doing roughly like 30% of our rev or our sales through the VFH app or the online store. I want that to look more like 80. So I think I want, I don't, if you're a regular customer of ours or even semi-regular, like, I don't want you going through aggregators. I want you going through us because it's way more profitable for us and you also end up saving a lot more money. So it's like a win-win. So I want that. We want to build, and then, so we want to build out that suite of brands. We want to have like 40 physical locations by 2028, and then roughly 200 plus, 160 to 250 kind of brands altogether, like brand locations. Because you've got roughly 4 to 6 in each restaurant.
Ambitious.
Yeah. And then there's so much stuff like happening with like precision fermentation, which is where you grow whey protein through yeast. So it's again one of those market fixes where it's like, if you can get milk without the cow kind of thing, like, you don't have to farm cows. You can, grow whey protein through yeast. There's those brands coming up. So I'd love to like potentially, and those industries are going to be more and more kind of, the actual products will be commodified. So, you'll be able to buy that protein and stuff. So potentially create, dairy-free, like animal-free dairy milk brands, like yogurt. Like, that's how I see it. I see it like a full ecosystem of like food, specifically that is kind of circumventing intensive animal farming.
Wow.
That's how I see it.
Nice, man. And I think the last question is more so around anyone who may have similar aspirations to you, if they're crazy enough to go into the restaurant industry. Do you have any, I guess, general advice? Obviously, you partner like a lot. You told your story a fair bit. But if you're someone who's in 2023, whether it's plant-based or not, preferably plant-based, what any sort of, I guess, advice that you'd give them as a starting point?
All right. I would start by saying, get your values sorted. Like, figure out what is the right thing in your mind and don't just wing it. Don't just follow people on socials and, like, actually walk through it, like, be like, okay, what do I think is right? What do I think is wrong? Am I okay with this? Am I okay with that? What kind of legacy do I want to leave? Go through the whole process, because I'll kind of quickly end with another little story that I think is actually had an impact on me as well, this story. It's about KFC. So it's about, if you think about the story of KFC, in many ways, it's an inspiring story. It's like an older person who a lot of people would have written that person out of society. There's a whole kind of, I can't remember the whole details of it, but pretty sure they were struggling with bankruptcy and so on and so forth. And they had this recipe for chicken. They went door to door, and lo and behold, they build this like amazing company that has changed the world and so on. That's the inspirational story. But from the perspective of like what's good for the world, like that company like pioneered intensive chicken farming and really had a massive kind of, I guess, role to play in like the suffering of just trillions of chickens. Like it's really it's such a consequential story, because when you're an entrepreneur, you're building something that's not there before. So if you're building something, you really should think about the consequences of it, because sometimes you get caught up in the building, and you're just, because we're all builders and we're all trying to build cool shit. Like that's what we're doing, So I would say, don't be that person. Like, try and make sure, like really envision, if this goes to success and fruition, like, is it leaving the kind of impact I want? Because I don't know if money is going to be that important. At some point, there's like good literature on money, and it's like a bell curve. You hit up a certain amount of wealth, and then your happiness kind of goes down anyway. So I don't know how much money really matters in that sense. Like I feel like it's more about, you look back on it and you're like, was that something that was needed, and was it good for the world? Am I proud of it? Get that sorted first. Once you're sorted, I would hope you would move away from animal farming, in the restaurant industry. I hope that happens. I really do. So once you get that sorted, I think with restaurants, with brands in general, like you really have to kind of figure out who your audience is, and be like zone in on like, who is your audience? Like who are the people that are going to come in to buy your product, and build for them. Don't get caught up in the noise. There's a lot of noise. Like if you're on LinkedIn and stuff, like there's people doing different things all the time. Like, and I think sometimes in our society there's a lot of shiny objects all the time, and you chase this, chase that, chase this. Like just be really kind of true to what your values are, and be like, who is my customer base? And then, the 80-20 rule, like the Pareto efficient type rule, where like, I think the rule goes something like, like 80% of your outcomes are from like 20% of the inputs kind of thing. So like 20% of what you do is actually generating 80% of what you want. I mean, I'm trying to I try and do that a lot now. So it's like, what actually matters, and then the rest of it is like try and delegate it, and try and that's what you hire for, like because you want to take accountability for the things that actually are going to drive revenue, and then there's a bunch. I would say those are the most important things, and then obviously you want to build systems. Like systems are super important. Like try and systemize yourself out of the business. I think we talk about that sometimes, you try and systemize yourself out of the business so you're not needed on a day-to-day. That's what you want, because then you can focus on the business. It's easier said than done, but you should start that, so start like trying to, every time you do something, be like, what am I doing? Can someone else do it? And can I write up a system so they can do it by themselves? And then you just keep doing that until you're kind of like, you're not needed anymore in the restaurant or the business. And then you can just be like, how can I like just optimize this thing, Yeah.
Dude, wise words, man. Appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your story.
Sure. No, thank you so much, both of you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Level Asian podcast. Make sure you subscribe and leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed the episode. And why not share it with friends and family who might enjoy it too? Also, make sure you head over to levelasianpodcast.com to join our email list and to receive the latest updates and get notified when the next episode drops. If you know a great guest we should feature, email us at contact@levelasianpodcast.com or DM us on our socials in the show notes. Catch you on the next episode.